So welcome back to our second day on the Forum of the Future of Work. I think for those who were here yesterday, we started off on a great note with some really interesting conversations and some provocative questions and discussions. So looking forward to more of that today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, my name is Christine Ferrugia. I'm the Director of Research Initiatives here at the Columbia University School of Professional Studies. Before we get started, for those who weren't here yesterday, I'll just make a few logistical points. We're going to have coffee, tea, beverages available outside in the rotunda all day, so please help yourself as and when you need. Their bathrooms are located downstairs. There are none on this floor, so if you need, there's a staircase adjacent to this room and an elevator on the other side, and you can just follow the signs downstairs. I also want to remind everyone that the forum is being recorded, and there are reporters present. And then lastly, we encourage you to share your experience through social media, and we have a hashtag #CUFutureOfWork. So the purpose of this forum is really to generate dialogue, as we started off with yesterday. We're really trying to answer the question of how higher education and employers can work together to prepare students who are employable and who are ready to contribute to innovation and who are able to craft really meaningful careers over their lifetime. So I want you to think of your questions, be ready to contribute, and participate in the discussion today. As Dean Wingard mentioned yesterday, this is one of our inaugural activities as we are preparing to launch a Center on the Future of Work through the School of Professional Studies. So as that takes shape, I will keep you informed of what's happening, and I encourage you all to just be prepared to hear that information and to participate as we move forward with those plans. Also, the conference that we're participating in today, the proceeds will be published in an edited volume in a book. So keep your eyes out as we'll announce information closer to publication date, but all of our contributors here today are contributors to our book. So if you're interested in what we're talking about, we'll certainly go more in depth in the book when that's released. So yesterday we really had some interesting conversations around the big picture of what's happening in the future of work, what leaders need to be concerned about from the business side. And we also had some really interesting and provocative comments about what should be the relationship between business and higher education. So we're going to build on more of that today, and with our first panel, we're going to go more in depth into into the employer perspective in terms of what skills are needed in the future of work. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our panelists for today. First, I'd like to introduce Gregory Robinson. He's the James Webb Telescope Program Director at NASA. We also have Lance Braunstein, who is the head of the Aladdin Product Group at Blackrock, and Dr. Amrit, who is Global President of Research and Development and Medical, with Pfizer's Upjohn division. I'm also very pleased to say that both Lance and Amrit are currently executives in residence with the School of Professional Studies. So thank you for your involvement with the school, and we're happy to have you. Our moderator today is Neil Irwin, and he is Senior Economics Correspondent for the New York Times. Neil is also a Columbia alum of the business school and was a Knight Bagehot Fellow here in business journalism. Neil's also an expert on the topic himself. He released a book just this week called How to Win in a Winner-Take-All World. So you shall all have information in your conference packets on that, so I encourage you to check it out if this topic interests you. So with that, I will turn the panel over to Neil. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I will take a brief moderator's privilege to tell you a little bit about kind of where I'm coming from on these things, and then ask our panelists to do the same. I've written about economics for the New York Times for the last 5 years, and at newspapers for my entire career. Most of that's big macroeconomic stuff. I write about the GDP report or what the Federal Reserve is doing, and that's a very enjoyable job. I like that a lot. But over the years, I've spoken more and more with friends, colleagues, sources, business school classmates about the challenges of figuring out how to have a good, thriving, durable career in this fast-changing economy. And I have heard over and over how hard it is to figure out, what's the next step? I've been in this job 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. I'm doing pretty well, but I'm not sure what the future looks like and what I can do to ensure that 10 years from now I can still say that I have a good job and good opportunities. And what I realized over time was that these two things are connected, and that the big picture shifts in the macroeconomy around how the corporate sector is developing, globalization, technological change, that those realities of the macroeconomy and these challenges of having a successful long career are part of the two sides of the same coin, really part of the same set of issues. So this book that came out this week, How to Win in a Winner-Take-All World, I went to a lot of big companies, said, okay, help me understand what it takes to thrive in this organization. And so that's flyers in your packet, and happy to come to your campus and talk about it if you would like, if you would have me. So we have a lot to discuss on this panel, but I wondered if each of you might do kind of this, what I just did. Tell me a little bit about where you're coming from, how work is changing in your organization, and your needs as an employer are changing, and help us tee up kind of where you're coming from on this whole set of issues we're going to discuss. I want to start with Amrit.
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, thanks to Columbia for inviting us here on such a beautiful day. And thank you to everyone for making it, despite that, in a full room. So my perspective is that I work in healthcare. My primary focus is on patients. And I say that partly as a physician, but also partly as an organizational leader, and being able to infuse a sense of what it is that will make a difference to patients from the organization, beyond just our own individual efforts, but really catalyzing an organization. The thing is, what constitutes that organization has changed. And it's changed in ways that I think cause us to think differently about higher education, about organizational design, about the culture that we create, about the processes that we use. And that is something that I find I need to be responsible to think about a lot, because we're seeing very fundamental changes. So for example, the world's become extremely global. And for me, whether the science comes from east or west or north or south, I have to be agnostic. I just want the best science. And for me, whether it comes from a millennial or someone pre-retirement or post-retirement, I have to be agnostic. I just want the best science that will make a difference, and so forth. So there are a lot of dimensions of change in an organization that is able to contribute that I think affect me and affect how I can be effective in bringing about that change in science that will ultimately make a change to patients.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Last.
Hello, I'm Lance Braunstein. So, different industry. I am in finance, so I've worked on Wall Street most of my career. Although I did start life at NASA. I was talking to Greg, so it was interesting to see one of my brethren. 20 years at Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. I'm now at Blackrock, and I look after a big sort of chunk of our technology organization. And I think what's relevant to me in this topic is a couple of things. One, the changing talent dynamic on Wall Street. So we're sort of at the intersection of finance and technology or engineering. And so when I think about that workforce and the dynamic, both globalization, the competitive sort of war for talent. So I no longer just pitch against Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. I'm now pitching against Google and Facebook and Amazon. That's one dynamic, and that's kind of changing the shape of my talent life cycle, my workforce, my people topology. So that's sort of one kind of broad set of things that I'm thinking about. The second is actually people outside of my sort of sphere of control. The rest of the organization, clients, partners, the world is just becoming more technical. And so injecting more of an engineering sensibility and including a broader set of people in kind of the world of engineering has become sort of job one. And so when I think about Blackrock, we've evolved this notion of the citizen developer. It's not just people writing software within my organization. It's quants on a desk. It's people doing data analysis. It's people who need to touch data and think about transactions differently because they are in transactional businesses, or even in a broader sphere in HR, and they need to be more data-driven. And then clients are demanding the same thing. So those are the two broad areas of sort of the future of work. I think we just all become more technical and analytic, and then I think the sort of career life cycle and talent management within engineering is evolving.
Great. Gregory.
So I'll talk from a NASA standpoint and more broadly the aerospace industry. The aerospace industry is, we call it a small community, even though it's pretty big when you see the primes out there. And attrition is not that high. One of the areas we compete fiercely in is software. So for future, you definitely need to think about software. We compete certainly with Northern California, with all of the newer companies, emerging companies in that area. And so that's the one area we do have a lot of attrition because they're highly paid and they're moving a minute like the NBA. So in NASA, we believe what I call organic learning is critical. So if I use my 3 adult daughters as an example, when the instant messaging and all of those type things were coming along, they would do their homework on the phone, 2 or 3 chat rooms, and doing their homework, and it drove me nuts. But they organically prepared for their future at that point in time. So I think the people in high school today, in college, and new graduates are already prepared for the future. So I think a strong base, and this is really important to the aerospace industry and certainly to NASA, to have a strong technical base, whether that's technical as we know it, or technical in finance or economics or something else. That's always the thing you reach back to go into other areas. So many years ago, when I was at the Goddard Space Flight Center, we were concerned with, we need a lot more mechanical engineers. So the center director said, well, why don't we start this no-harm retraining process? So if you're double E, you can do mechanical or vice versa. It's mostly the other way around. So we did that over an 18-month, 24-month period where people actually retrained themselves. And it was easy because they already had that strong base. I think the universities today are doing an excellent job with the strong base, certainly in the technical areas. So we have to make sure we don't lose that. And when I was at the Glenn Research Center, I used to do reverse mentoring with younger workforce. I'm never sure which word to use, younger, new entrants. Most times it's wrong. My daughters remind me of that often. So I did reverse mentoring, and I learned a lot about the way the younger workforce thought from an innovative standpoint. So we changed the way we did some of the things in our processes to allow that innovation to creep in versus being prescriptive from a process standpoint. So it's very important to teach them the fundamentals, and we as employers have to allow them some innovative space to still be sustainable in what we're doing, but allow them to be innovative as well. I think that's what actually prepares us for the future. And lastly, I was part of an activity in Zurich a couple of months ago, and future of work was a major theme there. This was with PMI, and one of the panels had a gentleman from Google, who you know well, and another one from Amazon, and a woman from Bayer. And these 2 guys were bouncing off the wall about this innovation stuff, and these old companies need to do. And she said, geez, we've been around for more than 100 years, and we've done very well. We're still doing well, still doing innovative things. So let's not throw out the sustainable things that we're doing well in order to prepare for the future. But again, it's critical to have that strong technical base, and that will take you wherever you need to go. I'm a witness for that.
So let me go back to Lance. You use this term citizen developer, which I like a lot. And I gather that means people who are maybe not engineers, not software developers, but have some kind of coding or technical background that enables them to do stuff. Elaborate on that. What can that mean? What should that mean?
Sure. I'm going to start there, and then I want to come back to this notion that what is old in a way is new, and I think culture really, really matters, even as we start to think about disruption, innovation. But the notion of citizen developer is really how do we enable more people to do analytic and technical work. Analytic work could be as simple as data analysis, so being able to unlock data in your field. So if you're on a desk and you want to generate a signal, you want to generate so-called alpha, it'd be good to be able to look at retail data or Google Maps data and think about that as an analyst, right? An equities analyst. And so there are two ways you could do that. You could go to the technology and engineering group and say, hey, I need to do that, or we can make that data available and give you basic training and tools to allow you to create a development ecosystem on your own. And that's the kind of empowerment that we think we're moving into. Data analytics is one, visualization's another, and then in some cases, people are actually programming. They're writing basic algorithms, and so Python has become sorry, you want me to? Oh, speak into the mic, sorry. I'm being very relaxed, sorry, I was hanging back there. Very California, sorry about that. So, let me get serious. So I think enabling basic development, which doesn't mean the equity analyst is becoming a software developer, but in a way they are, right? So there's developing this continuum, and the idea of like the over-the-wall kind of like I hand a set of requirements off and it goes into a black box, and then way later than I wanted it, it comes back. That world is changing, and by the way, it's changing for our citizen developers. But then that ecosystem is growing. So Aladdin is something that we use at Blackrock and that we sell to clients. All of our clients are asking for the same thing. So they don't want us to curate their engineering experience. They would like a base platform that provides scale, stability, et cetera, but then they want to do a set of things, right? They want some application programming interfaces instead of user interfaces. They want access to the data through data warehouses. And so I think a big part of how we're evolving our workforce is, and really to me this is a critical point in the future of work, is we're enabling more a more diffuse technical landscape than we've ever had before. And part of that is training, but certainly part of that is how we make data and systems available.
Amrit, I see you nodding. Does that apply in the pharma industry as well?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think that just to build on Lance's comments, in healthcare overall, you're dealing with science, so the technical aspects are going to be evolving all the time. But in addition to the individual data development skills, there are two other things that I would sort of add to the table. And so organizationally, and thinking about what skill sets are there, the need to understand and be credentialed, be thoughtful at a technical level, I think is an important entry point. I always worry when I see like the dumbing down of technical skills. And I think that is important in healthcare. The stakes couldn't be higher. But the two things that I would add are, one is that it moves so fast that the actual skill you're looking for is, can you learn quickly? That learning agility. Can you adapt quickly? Because yesterday's technical correctness isn't tomorrow's technical correctness. And it's actually quite hard to interview for that. It's quite difficult to be able to assess that as you promote people, develop people. But that is a very important skill in terms of adaptability and who will be able to deal with the next form of genomics or next form of AI in science. So that's one, adaptability in learning. I think a second is that, and this is particularly true with, I would say, millennial and younger employees who are very deliberate about this, is that even if you are the person working with the database, you're not sitting there shaking hands with a cancer patient, you're not sitting there thinking about, is HIV curable? What you have to understand is that your analysis connects to a deeper sense of purpose. And this ability to create a sense of connection between every colleague in an organization, no matter what their role, whether it's technical, whether it's financial, whether it's whatever it may be, that becomes very, very important, because the modern workforce, I think, is looking for more than a paycheck, is looking for a sense that my work makes a difference to society and I'm valued. And looking for that skill in that, can that colleague make a connection between whatever job they're doing this hour and the broader purpose of the organization, becomes both an organizational responsibility as a leader, but something that has to be part of the culture.
So I hear two threads here. One is technical ability. You know, everybody needs at least kind of some kind of analytical and perhaps coding ability. On the other hand, interacting with people, working in teams, communicating well, the hard versus soft skills. Gregory, which is it? If you're in the business of training or trying to get people ready for the workforce, how do you reconcile both of those demands?
So the answer is yes.
Exactly.
And I'm a prime example again. My good friend Ed Hoffman, who was our knowledge manager at NASA for a long time, started a wonderful program there in program project management leadership. 25 years ago, I would kick him out of my office. No one needs those soft skills. Why are you trying to get me to go to this training? And somewhere along the line, he convinced me. I went to one of these development classes developed in NASA. That's another area where academia can really help. And I was sold. So the leadership skills, and you can define what that means, developing teams, running teams, collaborating. We do a ton of collaboration in NASA at every level, including international. So it's critical to getting missions done. And I think those soft skills are critical to add to the hardcore technical skills. I'm still working on those, by the way, to get better at that. So Ed built a really good program in NASA to accomplish that. It served us extremely well. And again, I think academia can help. When I used to teach, not too long ago, graduate classes in project management, certainly taught the fundamentals. I think you can get most of that from PMI. But it was a lot about leadership and leading missions and developing teams, leading teams, collaboration, understanding international barriers and how to break those down, those types of things. I think that's critical. In my case, missions are really important. Getting missions formulated and developed and launched. And I talked about attrition earlier, and I think you guys hit on it a little bit. When certainly for big missions in NASA, when something launches and you see people standing around crying, I mean, that's connection. You know, this baby of mine, I just sent it off to kindergarten or wherever you send them off to, and people are truly crying. So it's an amazing connection to what they're actually contributing.
I mean, Lance, in finance, there's this image of the star trader or the star kind of deal maker who doesn't have to really work as a team. They are, king of their domain. It sounds like that might be changing.
Yeah, look, I think Blackrock is a different kind of a firm. So it's a 30-year-old startup. It happens to be the largest asset manager in the world, but it's 30 years old.
How many trillion dollars?
Exactly right. Exactly right. So it's 30 years old. It's run by the founders, and I don't think the culture allows for the star trader kind of a paradigm. And so I think this notion of soft skills, especially when you're in a culture that demands kind of cohesion and sort of a notion of one Blackrock. That's one of our principles. Are really critical. So your ability to work across lines. So when I think about this notion of a citizen developer, I own the software development at Blackrock, and I have to be okay with people across different organizational lines who are not in my sphere of control, but perhaps in distant spheres of influence. I have to be okay with that. They have to be okay with me as a provider of the platform for citizen development. And so I think if you want to preserve the culture, and that culture is the foundation of anything you do. So to me, what's old is new. I think your maxim is right. I think the idea is that people have to be able to come together. So the communication and collaboration that underpin that culture and some of the structures that you create to not allow for the star trader, and there's like a no jerk policy kind of implicit in that.
You're censoring yourself for
I'm censoring myself. Maybe jerk's not the word.
There's a camera running.
Yeah, there's a camera running, and and I do have a propensity to profanity, so I will not. But like,
Well, that's also a stereotype of Wall Street and finance. But.
Well, then here you are. I am the stereotype. So I think that's critically important. Right? And so even as we develop these hard skills, the ability to work with one another, like it's not just everybody becomes a quant and head down. It's like how you share data, how you share those insights and perspectives. That's what leads to innovation, right? It's not like I am going to compartmentalize Amrit and Greg and myself, and we're going to work independently on data analytics or visualization or an algo. It's like we have a conversation, he's bringing a different perspective, and so like the diversity of thought, that's where you innovate. Like that's where you suddenly have the aha moments of like, oh, wow, I never thought that, this insight from science or this insight from a different region or other sphere of diversity could change the way I think about my equity analysis.
I think there's something when we grow up learning about inventors and how innovation happens, we get the wrong impression of it, that it's some brilliant person sitting in a lab by themselves dreaming something up. Amrit, talk about how how innovation and new, whether it's a new drug, how it actually happens and how that ties in with the skills you need of your emerging workforce.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Greg and Lance have said, because the fundamental observation that we're seeing for the future workforce is that the unit of performance has transitioned. It's transitioning now from the individual to the team. And that's very fundamental, because what we're seeing is that when you assess, for example, a technology, when you assess a new process, a new organizational design, whatever it may be, if you want that outcome of innovation, then the criteria by which you assess that are no longer, am I making every individual successful? The criteria has to be, is this going to amplify the success of the team? And that team could be a global team, as diverse as you could imagine. And if whatever decision I'm making is not going to amplify the success of the team, then it probably isn't going to meet the overall organizational goal. And similarly, as organizational leaders, we then have to step back and say whether we're recruiting people from higher education or hiring people that are mid-career professionals, that ability to see how they will fit into that context of working in a team, working in an environment where multiple thoughts create a solution. That becomes part of the assessment criteria, and I think that becomes probably a change from how we may have done it in the past. Most of us in our careers have probably been to interviews where we're sitting there alone. Now more and more, we're sitting in interviews where there are 5 people who are all interviewing, and they're being observed together and how they interact together. And even that is indicative of how will they function as a team.
Is there a way to train people in that when they're in an educational setting? Is that something you either have or don't, or can people get better at that?
Well, my view on that is I think that is certainly trainable. I think there's no question that you can put in place, firstly, programs, training, skills, but it's actually more than sort of the schoolwork of going through the formula. I think this is where we get to applied skills. And when people are looking at a particular role, looking at opportunities, the ability for them to demonstrate that they have applied teamwork. The ability, I was talking to someone recently, and she said to me, I was asking her about leadership, and she said, well, in some of the experiences I've had, I learned that you can lead from the front, you can lead from the side, you can lead from behind. It's all different forms of leadership. And she then walked me through, different
Not everybody has to really be taking charge of the room to be an effective
absolutely
team
not. And in
player.
fact, the star trader that Lance was talking to, you virtually hear no one talking about that in today's world. It could even be a negative, but the ability to demonstrate that through experiences, I think is very, very important. There's no exam on I'm a good team player. It has to be experiential and applied.
Greg, do you agree? Is this a skill that can be learned? Is this ability to work in these types of teams something that higher education needs to be thinking about in how they structure education?
Absolutely. Someone wrote a book, I won't throw out names, called The 108 Skills of Natural-Born Leaders. So there's always a debate in the community, are leaders born or are they trained? And it's actually both. And we have to define what we mean with leadership. It's not always the kid that's dominating the playground in kindergarten. Can be, but it doesn't have to be. And it can be the kid that never gets on the monkey bars because they're afraid. It can be the leader. So we have to define those parameters. I think it's very important. Lance and I talked earlier before the panel about when we were younger growing up in NASA. Apprenticeship was really, really big. And a lot of people learned that leadership through the apprenticeship process. It was nothing special, wasn't even called that back then, but working with older peers, you learn that. The good and the bad is you learn to be just like them, and they made sure you did. And if you didn't, you weren't on their team, which is another whole problem. So all the things about diverse thinking and diverse looks and so on just didn't occur because I'm creating clones of myself. So I think that's one piece of it. Today, we were chatting about this as well, the younger folks coming along in the workplace, I see it all the time. They don't want to wait 25 years to get to where I am. And they're much smarter than me. My daughters run circles around me in smarts, and they got it all from their mama, by the way. They don't want to wait that long. We don't have the same apprenticeship programs and processes in place. And in some organizations, certainly I talked about Northern California, we've mentioned Facebook and Amazon and Google, those type organizations, the return on investment has to be much, much quicker. So how do we do that? And I think universities can really help with that, can jumpstart those soft skills so they can grow much faster. And just two examples for me, we had a mission many years ago called Mars Pathfinder, became Sojourner. And it was done out of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. And the team was really, really young. This was during our faster, better, cheaper time frame. And they executed the mission very fast, low cost. It did extremely well. All of these were young recent graduates, had no families, no responsibility. They could work 16, 18, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they got it done. And JPL has never been able to replicate that. And so you think about how do you make that happen, but then you can't replicate it. I think if you can get that jump start at the university, I think it helps get people in that mindset. And another, in Southern California, SpaceX, which most people have heard about. When you walk into SpaceX doors, you think you've walked onto Columbia's campus. I mean, just young people crawling all over the hardware and designing things. They've been very successful in a short period of time. You're talking about new companies. And you ask yourself, is it sustainable, and how did they do that? I mean, they're launching many, many rockets per year, which is quite amazing, and some very innovative, where they bring the first stage back to so they can recover it, which is the only one in the world who does that. Again, is it sustainable? Where did these young people get that? And the last thing I mentioned, I normally talk about capability, people, process, and tools, and I added another one a few years ago called environment or culture. So what did JPL do in that culture to create Mars Pathfinder? What has SpaceX done to create this culture, and Google and Facebook and all of these folks to create that culture? So as we develop the younger talent, do we get them ready for that next culture to be able to get a faster return on investment into leadership type roles?
Just one riff on what Greg just said. I think the apprenticeship that we grew up with was both technical and sort of hard skills, but also the culture, frankly, like the behaviors that you see, you know, in in your leadership team, in other people, like what's allowed, what's not allowed. I think that shapes culture, and that shapes the ways in which we work in a soft sense as much as the apprenticeship of hard skills. So like that, to me, that notion is quite powerful. I've seen it work incredibly well. Like at Blackrock, it's a thing. There's an intangible thing that happens. You watch how people behave in meetings, how people are inclusive, and think about sort of modes of interaction, and that propagates. Like it becomes very fractal within the organization. And I've seen other firms where like that doesn't work, and people behave badly. They're allowed to behave badly, and then suddenly, like lots of people are behaving badly. And the work, how it gets done, the sort of coming together and the sort of sum greater than the parts, that just it breaks down. So I think that apprenticeship notion is a powerful one for both hard and soft skills.
One other comment to add to that is, I think most of us have probably been apprentices at some point in time. And one of the things I recall about that, but I think it is changing as the future goes ahead, is that there is not a one-size-fits-all model for how you become a strong contributor in an organization. When most of us were apprentices, I remember having a few specific criteria that you had to meet, certain boxes you had to check. But I think as we see organizations evolve, it's becoming clear that the definition of excellence in the workplace for a colleague is not uniform. There are some people that will be very good at skill X or skill Y, some people that will be very good at A or B, whatever it may be. And it is not necessary to be able to do everything well, but be in a place where you realize you can succeed in an organization with this awareness of a finite set of skills that you're very good at. And that actually, I think that sort of freedom and that space allows people the safety to join an organization and probably contribute in a way that they may not expect. And we're certainly finding, so for example, in healthcare, you might not expect it, but I have found physicists that have joined my team. I've found anthropologists that have joined my team. And they all have a very unique way of contributing, but they all definitely do contribute.
Yeah, that diversity of thought, is amazingly powerful. It's a multiplier. Some of the best people on my engineering team are history majors and English majors.
Wow.
So
Lance, we hear a lot about automation and AI and how much that's changing the entire trajectory of work. I think if you go to a trading floor today compared to 20 years ago, there are jobs that don't exist anymore. Is there a way to future-proof yourself? Are there ways that how can a person who just wants to still have a good job in 10 years, 20 years, position themselves, and how is that playing out in Blackrock?
The thing I've told my children, my daughter is about to go to college, and she's interested in neuroscience. My boy maybe is more on the sort of less hard side of the world. And I could see him being a history major. He's quite interested in Egypt. And the thing that I've told both of them is just learn to code. Like whatever else you do, learn to code. And so how do you future-proof any profession? I think you understand that data matters. Like data-driven decision-making is going to increasingly matter, and I mean for every profession. When I look at the ways in which machine learning and artificial intelligence have pervaded enterprises like Blackrock, it's everything from operations where you would expect sort of like, here's a repetitive task, let's figure out how to do something predictive around data, and then how to make it automated so that a human being doesn't have to touch that exception queue next time, to, frankly, non-traditional applications of AI, like in HR, for example. When you think about this war for talent and sourcing great developers in my case, but I'm sure it's across every profession, and how you find those people who are relatively scarce, how you vet them. So like one of the things that we've thought a lot about is imagine a world where there are these public open source repositories, and you figure out who's contributing to those, and you do that in an automated way. So the next time you think about a Java developer or Python developer, you actually go to the source. You go to the open source repositories and you say, who's relatively contributing, who's answering questions. You create some view, like that's a different application of AI than you may have considered traditional, right? So I think operations would be more traditional. Certainly algos would be more traditional. Like, again, we talked about AlphaGen earlier, you know, the seeking signals. Like, how many cars are in the parking lot at Walmart? Like, people do analysis on that kind of data. This is like pervading the world. So how do you future-proof? You learn to code. You don't shy away from the data. Sorry, that sounded like a soapbox. I got a little excited there.
Greg, how about
I'll have to
aerospace?
excuse that.
How does that,
Yeah, well, I agree. I don't think you can future-proof either. Again, I strongly believe that the younger workforce and folks coming into college, they already see the future, even though we don't, because that's what they're actually living. A guy who was a major investor many years ago told me he made most investments in things that his wife and daughters were purchasing. He could see what was happening based on their purchase patterns, right in his own house, right? So the young folks today, I often say kids, young folks today can actually see the future. They're living it. So I don't think we have to proof them from anything. It's people a little bit younger than me, a little bit older than them, right? Those are the ones who are having a tough time or will have a tough time, and it's always been the case. I think employers and universities have to be prepared to retrain them very quickly. I mentioned folks going from electrical to mechanical. It was very quick, but I think that strong base made it easy. A lot of people are going back to school to get graduate degrees in other fields and to prepare for the future. Actually, I had a very eventful flight flying in the other night from LA, so it was a young lady on there coming back to New York to get her stuff to move to LA. She's actually going to UCLA to get a certificate in data science. And I can't tell you what her undergraduate degree is in. And she knows that's a future, you know, decoding numbers and patterns and data patterns and things like that heavy in your area. But whoever developed that program out there was ready for that, right? So they're ready for her. So universities have to be ready for those niche things that are coming along. Many years ago, NASA decided to get out of the technician business, technicians as government workers. Many of those technicians, I mean, they were extremely smart. For one reason or another, they didn't become engineers, but many of them did after that. So they already had a strong base. There were universities around all of these NASA centers. These people went back to school. And in most cases, the schools adjusted their current knowledge and talent so they didn't have to start as a freshman. They could start as juniors and sometimes even seniors because they had a lot of the requisite knowledge. So adjusting to that also, universities sometimes can be hardcore on, well, you have to take all these classes. My wife was a teacher, so I know they did a lot of that. People would come out of industry to teach in high school. It's a lifelong dream. But you have to take all these classes. These classes couldn't teach them anything they didn't know. So you have to be prepared to adjust to these people coming in for retraining. Don't take them back through the washer. Otherwise, they won't be prepared.
Anything you want to add? Neely, it's very interesting to hear about staying current with technology. And in some senses, I think that staying current with technology is like gravity and just cannot be avoided. But the real paradox, and I see this a lot in healthcare, is that the more technology becomes pervasive, right, the more AI, the more automation, the more computer interfaces that we see, the irony in a way is that you see a greater premium being placed on the human interface. You see a greater premium being placed on human skills. And I think now, as we've stepped back, we're certainly very purposeful and very deliberate about saying, how can we be sure to nurture human skills at a time when, you know, the technological advancement is just unstoppable. And particularly so, you know, I'll give you just a 10-second example. You know, we have had interfaces where you can consult with a physician online through FaceTime or through your phone for probably more than 5 years. And if I ask people in this audience to say, put up your hand if you've ever used that, I won't, because I already know the answer, and virtually no hands will go up. Right? So even though it's available, ultimately people want that human interface. So I think, have to be sort of self-aware of that and step back to say that we continue to nurture that human interface.
So everything we've been talking about so far is about how individuals can succeed and do well in your organizations. Let's flip that on its head. What does it take for your organizations to be a desirable employer, to win in the kind of scramble for talent, whether it's culture, collaboration, operating principles? Gregory, what do you have to do at NASA to make sure you're getting the best engineers in the future and being a welcoming place?
So we do have the luxury of not, we don't have that problem. We have, many thousands of applicants for the same jobs often. The one area, of course, I'm government, right? So the process is slow to hire people, even if you've told them you want to hire them. And you do have a dozen companies knocking on their door as well, normally with higher salaries. So that's one thing that's government-wide that we continue to work on. It's gotten better. But actually competing for talent other than software, we don't have much of a problem there. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, we're at the other end of that spectrum. So what have we done? There are a number of things. So I think being a purpose-driven organization, and if you've read anything about Blackrock, you know that that notion is quite important to us. Larry Fink, one of our founders and our CEO, has published a purpose letter, and it's quite powerful. Like, it is about inclusion and sort of driving, you know, better financial outcomes for more people. And so I think that resonates. I think that's an attractor. And when I think about campus recruiting in particular, people want to be at a place that's purpose-driven. So that has helped. In our world, where, you know, I'm largely competing for the same talent as Google, you know, environment really matters. So, like, dress code sounds silly, but, like, you can wear jeans and sneakers. That kind of thing matters. Flex time, you know, flexibility in general has tended to matter. You know, our culture has been an important attractor, and so we continue to think about this notion of one Blackrock as kind of experiential. And, you know, what does that mean for people? It means, like, rotation assignments and stretch assignments for relatively new joiners, right? So, like, things like that really resonate when you talk to somebody on campus or somebody kind of towards the beginning of their career. They want to know that they're not going to come in and be stuck in a place for many years that is rigid and formal. Like, they want the informality, and they could go and have, you know, 3 meals a day at Google with, you know, ping pong right down the hall. So that's kind of what we're competing with, and I think the way we compete is not on ping pong and kind of the physical environment, but by creating a really compelling purpose, culture, and challenges in their work.
It's funny, the subtle cultural things. So for my book, I have a case study from somebody at Goldman Sachs. When I went down there to interview the guy, I put on my, you know, charcoal gray suit and my tie, and I go down to Goldman Sachs, and both the executive I was interviewing and the PR person were both in jeans, and I'm like, something's wrong when the reporter is in a suit and the investment banker is...
So I was at Goldman for 8 years, and as was Jason. And so we were there at a moment when that evolution was happening. So you go to the banking floor, and it was still, you know, 3-piece and a tie. And then you'd go down to the trading floors and the technology floors, and you could have been at, like, Etsy or like Foursquare, right? It was very much like that startup feel, and I think that really matters to people. Like it really, that informality and sort of culture of, low-key culture, I think, for millennials in particular, seems to have resonated.
So we're supposed to go to your questions imminently. So be thinking about what you want to ask. But let me tee that up with one more question to all three of you. What do you think higher ed, the entire world of kind of education and training, is doing well, should be doing better to make sure they're creating the workforce that you all need to have your organizations be effective? Amrit?
There's a lot that's being done well, and I can see that because I go back to the same schools and I go back to the same institutes and see how programs evolve over time, and I see how graduates of these programs are different, year from year. I think a couple of the things that stand out as being particularly good are, one, programs that invest in multidisciplinary training. So you may be there to learn biology, but if you walk away from that program with only a biology perspective, but without, for example, some aspect of a business perspective or a legal perspective, you're probably missing out some of the value in that. And I think that's very, very important, because often what I find is that in higher ed, this is where you get your first exposure to something that may end up forming a career. And that I think is high impact. The second is I think that there is a great and positive shift in applied learning. And I'll give you an example. Here at Columbia, I was involved. I attended the bioethics program. And it's possible to look at bioethics as an academic discipline, the morals and ethics of healthcare as a very nuanced academic field. But probably the more thoughtful way to look at it, and I was pleased to see it being done here, is to look at it in the sense of applied bioethics, in the sense of, well, if there's someone reaching an end-of-life decision, I can talk through the academic criteria, or, and in fact what we did at Columbia was we had to say, well, how would I write my end-of-life wishes? And how would I state that? And we all had to actually write a statement. And let me tell you, that one page took me weeks to write because I didn't know what I would put. But that is truly a way of making the academic practical. And that's one example, but I think we could probably do that in 100 fields, and I really encourage higher education to focus on that.
Lance?
Yeah, that's a cool exercise. I'm going to go do that. But just riffing on that idea, the extent to which we can, and I agree with all the positives, like making good thinkers and whole people, like that's really important, and I think something that is done relatively well. But being slightly more vocational, like being thoughtful about what you do in that first 90 days when you show up to work. And training in a vocational sense, like I don't mean like, teach me the theory of like circuits, but like what's that 90, 180-day experience going to be, and what's going to prepare me like truly vocationally for my work life? I'm not sure that's the remit of the university, and so like I struggle with this, and we've had conversations about this, Jason and I, but there is some element of that practical learning, like just kind of digging into the old apprenticeship model that we had talked about earlier, and figuring out how to train a worker as much as train a thinker. I think there's something there. And so like there have been training programs at every company that I've been at that have sort of backfilled that a little bit. You see a lot of these kind of code academies in my world where, people may have a 4-year degree, but they're still doing like a full stack code academy, right? They go for 15 weeks and they become like the pragmatic developer instead of just the computer scientist. So there's a thing, I haven't quite put my finger on it, but there's a thing that feels vocational that maybe we need to explore.
Gregory.
So I think the universities are doing an excellent job with the base technical training. Of course, it's 90%, if not higher, on theory, which is really good. I think more practical knowledge in that process is warranted, and they can hit the ground running more so. I also believe, I think Amrit touched on this, the multidisciplinary piece. When I was at Howard University, 1,000 years ago, we had to do a senior project. So it forced us to combine all of those experiences and classes into a senior project. What we did not have in that at the time was working across teams and doing that senior project, which is critical and more critical today. So I would say at the undergraduate level, we have to make sure that they're getting these experiences and projects and teams, writing, and they can hit the ground running. Also think that's the launching pad, to use one of our terms, the launching pad for the rest of their experiences when they go into the workplace. At the professional learning level, we currently do a lot of that teaming and projects and things like that. It's critical that the instructors are what we call current and relevant in their field. Certainly at the professional level, you don't need just a theorist teaching. People will fall asleep and they won't recommend your class to their buddies who are coming along. So it's important to have people who are still practicing or not too far ago practice, so they can bring a lot of the practical applications into those courses. Otherwise, they're going to leave strictly with theory, and they, in my opinion, would not have gained a whole lot and wasted time and money. So those are my thoughts.
So who has questions for our panel? Over here.
So, Martin Kurzweil from Ithaca SNR. So most of the conversation, with the exception of Greg's comments on technicians, is focused on what I would think of as highly skilled, highly educated workers. Of course, your organizations rely on a lot of middle skill and lesser skilled workers as well. And there's, the famous, maybe apocryphal story of, the reporter coming into NASA, seeing a custodian changing the garbage and asking him what his job was, and he said, I'm sending a man to the moon. I wonder if that's still true. That custodian probably works for a staffing firm now, not for the government. Probably hasn't been made whole from the government shutdown yet. And so I'm just wondering if you could all comment a bit on how you see the future of work developing for those middle and lesser skilled workers, and how your organization may be playing a role to help prepare the folks that work for you now for that.
For me, very personally, the notion of a purpose-driven organization, like your example is spot on, like I'm sending somebody to the moon. If you can rally your workforce from sort of most skilled to unskilled around a purpose, I think that's profound. And so I think if you can really make people feel a part of that purpose, like a part of, there's a fireman who has a pension who I am helping to retire. Like, that's a real specific kind of a purpose, and including more people in that sort of financial wellness is our purpose, as it turns out. I think that resonates, and it resonates for sort of every level of skill in the organization. And I've been largely in my career at organizations that are not as purpose-driven. So I will say that I've sort of been uniquely surprised here at Blackrock to find how strong that purpose is and how people relate to it. Like, everybody sort of understands what Larry said and kind of rallies around it. And then I've worked at organizations where it's like, I'm just going to make as much as I can. And like, I'm going to optimize for like one Lance instead of here, one Blackrock. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
I did a story a couple of years ago.
One Lance. That just got weird. It got like very selfish. And
about Walmart. And, they're kind of synonymous with low wages and not really treating entry-level workers very well. But in the last few years, they've realized that if they're really going to compete with Amazon and in this retail is becoming a much more technologically advanced business, they need their in-store employees to be more savvy about how to use different devices, make different decisions in the store about what to stock. And so they have raised wages, they've increased their investment in training, and it's not a coincidence that even these workers in a Walmart, these aren't tremendously high-paying jobs, but they're better than they were 4 or 5 years ago because of some of these advances and technological shifts that we've been talking about. Anybody else want to weigh in on this one?
Case, I spend a lot of time with our procurement or contracts people, legislative affairs folks. I spend a lot of time on the Hill and other stakeholders, our international organization, and the list goes on, legal. And all of these people feel very connected to the mission, to develop in the mission. And we cannot get it done without any one of them. And even when I go out to talk to schools, to much younger than us people, people will ask me, do I have to be a scientist to come work for NASA or an engineer to come work for NASA? I said, no, absolutely not. The way you practice to get there is the same as the engineer, but you don't have to be. So we're very deliberate about it. It's somewhat natural now, if you want to use that term, that everyone feels part of the team because everyone has a role, they know it. And if that role does not happen, then we don't have a successful mission. So it's part of the culture in NASA.
I think we're all going to say the same thing here, but a couple of nuances on it. I mean, definitely purpose-driven. At Pfizer, the purpose is to deliver breakthroughs that change patients' lives. But what is interesting about that purpose is making it inspirational and accessible. And inspirational means, we could have someone who's controlling the temperature on a fridge with cell lines, and for them to feel, close to a life-saving patient is something that has to be organizationally, continuously echoed, communicated. You'll see that written on the walls and so forth. So something, very accessible. The other aspect, though, is how the organizational design changes. And we have recently made a change to actually half the number of levels in the organization, which may sound small, but actually turns out to be a very dramatic and fundamental change. But what it does mean is that person controlling the temperature of the fridge is, instead of being 10 levels away, now only 5 levels away. Their chances of spending actual face time, with other leaders, other colleagues in different roles is dramatically increased as the organizational changes shape. And that makes the purpose accessible in a slightly different way.
Another question? Yes, ma'am.
So, Cappy Hill from Ithaca SNR also. We've been talking, so it makes sense that if we want to have a healthy society and economy, that we need to have lots of really good jobs that improves individuals' welfare and improves our society. It seems to me there are 3 players in this: higher education, companies, and the government. And I think on the higher ed side, we've talked a lot about what we could do to do a better job with that. I think increasing access so that more people have access to higher education is part of it. I'd like to push back a little bit on the 2 other players. So corporations and companies, shouldn't they be taking more responsibility for training and educating their workers? You talked about backfilling. I don't think it's backfilling, it's actually a responsibility of companies to help train their workers. And then I think this is more for you, Neil. What could the government be doing to guaranteeing that, in fact, everybody has access to a good job? I think it relates to things like the macroeconomy and the outcome in terms of income inequality and access to wealth has an impact on ability to have a good job. So leave it at that.
You want to start, Lance? Sure. I'll start.
Yeah.
So on the government side, look, I think the single best thing is something that's being done right now, which is running what Janet Yellen calls a high-pressure economy. Running the economy hot. We're at 3.6% unemployment. Hasn't been that low in 50 years. That's 1969. And I think if the single best thing that could happen for American workers is for that to persist or even go lower and stay there for a long time. What we see happens when the economy is running tight and running hot is employers have to be more creative about filling jobs. And so suddenly people who they wouldn't even look at during the recession are, they're willing to take a chance on. Somebody who's maybe has been in prison, somebody who has some kind of disability, people who have maybe not the exact right resume, but look like they could be trained up and really turned into the exact person that the company needs. And I think companies are more willing to do that type of thing when they can't just, in 2009, you could hire anybody. If you had an empty job, you'd have 100 applicants who are qualified. And that's not the case anymore, and that's a good thing for American workers. That's a first step. I think the second thing is, given what it takes to succeed and all the things we've been talking about in the 21st century economy, is it time to rethink this assumption that you'll have public education through 12th grade and then you're kind of on your own? There might be some subsidies here and there. Is something more like community college, the first 2 years of four-year college, should that be a basic part of the kind of social compact? That's an expensive choice, but it's a thing that I think it's in the political debate, and I think that'll only become more true as it becomes clearer that really just a high school diploma isn't enough to have a good career in the way the world has changed.
I'll say something about how we think about community engagement and training, and I think there's obviously training within the firm. So we have something called the Blackrock Academy, and so we think about training our employees and reskilling all the time. But there's also a number of community outreach and kind of broadening our reach to other talent pools. So we've partnered with a variety of different organizations: Coalition for Queens, Laboratoria, Zip Code Wilmington, Perscolis. These are organizations that are targeting sort of underserved communities, and we're trying to figure out ways of creating training and then, maybe more importantly, job placement. So once somebody goes through a 15-week boot camp at Flatiron, for instance, that's one of the partner organizations that we work with, giving them an opportunity to intern at Blackrock and actually showing up in a non-traditional way into that workforce. I do think that is a responsibility of corporate, and maybe one that has not been as front and center as it could be. I think we take that mission quite seriously, and it'd be great to see more people do that. And there are other great organizations. I mentioned a few that we work with, but Year Up is another kind of organization that is in that space. And so, you'd love to see more of that. And especially given what I said in a different part of this conversation on the ways that you become an employee, like a technical employee at BlackRock or Amazon or fill in the blank, maybe are going to be non-traditional. So maybe you don't need the 4-year degree. Maybe it's all right to go to a 15-week boot camp. And so that starts to create more inclusion for a broader population. I don't know if that answers your question, but certainly we've taken that mission quite seriously. And I didn't, sorry, I'll stop speaking.
Yes, sir.
I want to get back to the, the issue of collaboration and soft skills, which a notion I buy into very, very much. I think at the school here, we do a lot of teaching with our instructional design team support around collaboration, group projects, and soft skills and competencies. And certainly in the corporate world, that's become more and more important. My question is, in your environments, how do you balance those forces against notions of, say, individual accountability, time pressure, profitability? How have you been able to manage through that?
Amrit?
I think it always ends up being a balancing act on this, because it always ends up being something where you have to develop criteria, you have to develop mechanisms of assessment that sort of stimulate both. So we will find, for example, in everything from goal setting to defining a professional journey, someone that you lay out aspects of both individual development and team development, and make sure that there's an opportunity in whatever role, whatever assignment a colleague takes, that they are developing each of these in quite a measurable way. I'll give you an example. We have taken the opportunity to rotate, team leaders on particular project teams. And part of that is that we think that, okay, it will bring a fresh set of eyes for the organization, success of the team. But another part of that is making sure that of the 6 people in the team, each person gets to wear that hat and understands, empathizes with what the team leader will be going through at any moment in time. And I think that's a very, very important kind of balancing act to strike.
Go over here.
We generally establish milestones for the project team, and those milestones are measured at different points in time. And the overall accomplishment cannot occur without those collaborations and partnering and so on. So each individual also gets their own milestones. That's where the personal accountability actually flows down. And every person on the team has to contribute effectively, actually, to get the mission done. And they're measured periodically, at different scales based on what mission it is.
Let's go over here.
Hi, Ann Trumbore from Wharton School. I lead Wharton Online. My question is around a problem that a lot of us, I think, in higher ed face, which is many of our institutions, particularly the R1 institutions, aren't actually in the business of educating students. We're in the business of producing knowledge. And so when we try and do courses for the public, what we're faced with is dealing with folks who have spent 20 years developing a theory that may now no longer be applicable or is applicable in very different ways given the new technologies that they themselves may not be familiar with. So just weaving in a couple of the comments here, where does the responsibility lie between the theory and the practice of the schools that most of you come to get your applicants from, and what you talked about in terms of the applied practical matters? There's a business opportunity here that coding academies are filling, but what about business opportunities or responsibilities for the soft skills, project-based, and other more current skills?
Lance, any thoughts?
So, well, I felt Greg had talked about this notion of contemporary kind of applied knowledge. I do think that matters. I think the idea that maybe there are more long-tenured people in technical fields that are fast-moving is a challenge that we need to contemplate. And so when you think about a code academy, which is, a rather different kind of model in terms of like who's teaching the course, it's not infrequently a practitioner. It's somebody who is coding and then coming in and saying, hey, here's how you write a dynamic web page, or here's how you make a database call in a contemporary way with a modern messaging system. I think that's a little bit of a conundrum. I think that higher ed and the sort of more vocational education has like a real gap, and that's one of the things that I think contributes to this notion of I'd love to see a little bit more of that practicum, and so part of that is just the shape of the curriculum. Like, to my earlier point about what do you do the first 90, 180 days, like that sort of speaks to the curriculum. It could be good to have soft skills and be good to have that organizational kind of perspective when you come in, how to navigate a big enterprise, that's hard to do, but then also the hard skills of like how do you become a full stack developer.
My name's Susan Heegard. I'm with the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, and my question tags a little bit onto the question back here with respect to middle skills. And I'm just wondering, you all work for reputable, large, affluent, well-known organizations. How would you advise the companies that are smaller, the employers that are smaller, nonprofits, smaller employers throughout the rest of the country, in terms of their preparation of workforce and their connection with the regional institutions in their communities, where the vast majority of people, I think, are employed? Thanks.
So I deal a lot with a lot of companies in the aerospace industrial base. Some are mom and pop organizations, been around a long time, but still small. They have a niche product. I think for them, each employee has to do a lot of things. You see this in nonprofits and not-for-profit organizations and other small businesses. Everyone does everything, right? The president does the same, some of the janitorial work one day, and sometimes the janitor does the president's work one day. That's the only way these organizations can thrive. So I think it happens just somewhat naturally there. If we can, academia, can provide a space for these people to come in at a lower cost. I don't know how we do that. Then I think that could be helpful as well, to give them another avenue other than just themselves. But normally each employee has to do everything. So they learn contracting one day, and they're practicing engineering the next day, and they're practicing partnering with someone down the street the next day. What they don't have generally are multiple mentors to help them in that process. Am I doing it kind of right, or am I creating bad habits? Am I learning it from a broader community in a university setting? So if we can make that connection, I think it's really important. But they do it every single day because they have to.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, Greg, you started to get to some of the question here. My name is Jill Klein. I'm from American University. And most of us on the higher ed side here come from these professional studies, continuing ed, where our student is non-traditional. They are, not to say that it's bad to be older, but they're not 18. So we've had a good conversation here, I think, about what do we do with our traditional student, what are some things that we can do in the classroom. But to sort of follow on this thing that Gregory started to do, how can your organizations look at your not quite mid-career people who didn't go to school when data was the hot word? What are things that we can do together? How do you see connecting to schools of professional studies, continuing education? Have you all thought about how to engage with us, or what would help us do a better job? Because we do believe there is this space that is probably non-degree. And what do you do when you're 35 or 40? Do you really want to go back and get a big 60-hour master's? No.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I was actually just reflecting, when Greg spoke earlier about having thousands of applicants and not needing to worry about it. So I would take a little bit of a different view about that even though we have thousands of applicants, I still worry about it, because that doesn't mean they're the right applicants. And what I think as an organization, to your question, is we've stepped back and we live in an ecosystem, which is very much about a huge diversity of organizations. This is, I suppose, in the world of science, where you've got small companies, large companies, you've got people with no training, and then you've got people with more degrees than would fit on a page. But the thing you learn in that is that no one has the monopoly on good ideas. Right? And this is very, very important organizationally, that we set up, I think, a culture of being able to work with either individuals or organizations. And sometimes, if you look at a company like Pfizer, where there are close to 90,000 people, we will sometimes be working in an organization that has 2 people. Okay, and how do you make that, how do you make that relationship seamless? So part of that is we essentially try and create the culture where there is an openness to good ideas, and there is an openness to people that can contribute and talent that can contribute, with a little bit of I think, designed blindness to what the background may be, and just judging an idea on the value and the merit of the idea. This is how, 2-person biotech companies end up making, I guess, transformational innovations, and why we're very eager to talk to 2-person biotech companies.
I'll just add one thing. So I think there is a gap between, there's a war for talent, right? There's a gap between supply demand. And I think a very direct answer is create the right partnerships in corporate America where you figure out what that opportunity is, that, you know, supply-demand mismatch, and then train to the demand, right? So like I need data scientists. There's a dearth of data scientists around the world. And so like it'd be good for that person who wants to retool, you know, the non-traditional student that you described who wants to retool to learn data science techniques. And like that suddenly becomes a really interesting partnership conversation because there's a very commercial outcome, right? I've got a need, you know, you're in the position to sort of meet that demand. Does that make sense? And I feel like we've...
I think this is hard.
Yeah.
We'd love to get the silver bullet because it'd be good for us. It'd be good for you.
It is hard, but I think it begins with the partnerships. And I guess what I'm really saying is like, it's like figuring out that supply demand.
That's because I'm the shortest person here.
You and me both, and so, but figuring out that supply-demand mismatch, I think begins with the conversation, right? I think it begins truly with the partnership.
If I may add, the Northern Virginia Community College, which is quite large, I've spent some time with, and in Cleveland, the Tri-C, the Cuyahoga County Community College, is quite large as well. And they do a lot of certificate training, and certainly the AA level training. I don't know how universities can and should partner and or have similar types of programs. I think that's where a lot of non-traditionals come in. We have all of these IT certificates that are even outside of community colleges that people get, and they've been doing it for many years. Again, that future wave was IT, right, and still is. So how do we connect to that? That's where a lot of these students are. You can go on to have a great career in those areas without a college degree. And again, if someone comes in with the right levels of experience, technician type, I don't mean that specifically technician, can we accelerate their learning to get a degree versus forcing them into a box that we've created and won't change? So.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the panel. And Neil, thank you for your column and for your recent book.
Thank you.
It's unbelievably helpful to helping us navigate what's happening. So a very quick observation and a question. The language of the panel, including the discussion yesterday, is very interesting. I think we've heard the word non-traditional used more times in a panel than I think I've heard in quite a long time. But we're also using words, and we're using them to have different meanings. You talked about knowledge creation as the role of the university. Many business leaders today say that the work of businesses is knowledge creation. They would say exactly that. By the way, they would say it's not about training, it's not about sharing knowledge, it's about creating knowledge at the edge of what we're doing. We use the phrase, Lance, war for talent. A brilliant phrase coined by McKinsey partners in 1998, before globalization, before the mobile phone, before cloud, before AI, before any of the things, before the gig economy, before any of the things that we're talking about. The question is, and from a business perspective, and I'd like to talk about the same question to the panel after this, if 2010 to 2020, where we are roughly, 2009 to 2019, was X% change in your businesses and your industry, in terms of how you're structured, how work is being done, how we're training employees, sort of what's being automated, how the workforce is changing, how the workplace is changing. What's the change look like from 2020 to 2030? Is it X to 2X? Is it 50%? Is it 3X? I think that will help us together gauge how far we need to go.
I like that.
Go for it. That's a hard question, so
Yeah, that's a hard question. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm happy to give it to you.
I'll give Greg some time. I'll give Greg some time to think and make a comment. So, look, in my view, I think the change is going to be very, very significant. I mean, you asked for numbers. It's hard to point a number, but I would just say very fundamental. And the reason I say that is because a a lot of the work that we're doing is oriented to how society is evolving, and how healthcare is evolving, diseases are evolving, and we've just seen this come to life recently where, Pfizer is a 150-plus-year-old company, but for the first time this year, we have launched a new division that is only focused on non-communicable diseases, so heart disease, mental health, and so forth, because it's only in recent years that those diseases have become the predominant cause of death and disability in the world. When we were all children, the major causes of death in the world and disability were infectious disease, malnutrition, and so forth. And so, that kind of major change has meant that in many senses, we're starting afresh on how do you structure, how do you have a strategy, how do you pick the right partners, how do you get the right talent, and so forth. So it's quite a fundamental refresh. And I can imagine that the shape of the organization and the people in the organization will look very different a decade from now.
I will come up with an answer for my own company and industry while Lance and Greg think about it. So at the New York Times, I didn't work there in 2010, but I worked at the Washington Post, which is a similar organization in a lot of ways. In the news business, at that time, 10 years ago, we were an assembly line. It was a manufacturing plant. You wrote a story for the print newspaper, fed it into a process, it ended up on people's doorstep the next day. We had the web, but we weren't really thinking that way. And now, if you go to the New York Times or the Washington Post, you'll see a bunch of teams in a glass conference room, people with very different types of skills, traditional writers and editors like me, but also coders and engineers, graphic designers, videographers, audio people, even kind of product people and business side people, because if you're creating a new app, it's not just an editorial decision, it's also, well, where does the ad go? Where's the, how much do we charge for it? So that kind of type of collaboration didn't happen in my industry 10 years ago. Now it very much does. I think there's going to be less change in what you're asking over the next 10 years, not because all of this is static and not because the New York Times app is going to be exactly the same in 10 years, but because we've made this adjustment to a process of kind of constant change and innovation that I think having that way of working is now in place and becoming more so every day. And so even as the actual products change perhaps dramatically, I think the kind of way we work is now much more entrenched. So 50% of X or something like that.
So from an aerospace standpoint, I think a lot of things will change over the next 10 years. One is on the aeronautics side. As we do more research and actually developing supersonic and hypersonic aircraft, we can go from shorten my trip to LA a couple times a month in half. You can go from here to Europe in half or a third of the time, and certainly going to the Far East would make things a lot different. Some of the things that prohibit that today is fuel burn and mostly noise. So we're looking at lowering the boom, sonic boom, so we can go much faster, more efficient, and also not disturb communities. I think that will change economic footprint and commerce around the globe. So I think that will impact how people work, which will impact other tools and types of training. The other area, CubeSats, we were talking about that earlier. So instead of a big satellite like I work on, there are a lot of little CubeSats now. We call them 1 cube and 2 cube and all the way up. Kids are developing CubeSats in high school, and certainly universities have a lot of work going on in CubeSats. Initially, they were for technology development. Can we push a little detector? Now these CubeSats can actually do communications. They can do science, and they're launching them by the hundreds. Small companies, have dogs running around in the place, and they come and go and so on. Fascinating environments. Those environments are changing how we work and when we work. Many of these young folks are working for that company, and they have their own company off to the side and doing similar kinds of things. They, as well as we are, connecting globally with partners based on expertise. You don't have to do everything in-house anymore. I think that's really going to change. It's going to create a lot more entrepreneurship in the aerospace industry. And lastly, I often talk about environmental culture. We had a space race way back when. and this is the anniversary of Apollo this year, and there was a culture and an environment, right? We were competing with the Soviets back then. Now there's a space race, a commercial space race. I mentioned SpaceX and Blue Origins and all these other companies, these billionaires with a lot of money. But it's been good for the whole industry. All of them are racing to create a brand and a market in space, whether it's in low Earth orbit, taking people to the moon, one day Mars, etc. I think that race is going to increase, and it's going to create a lot more jobs of certain types. And again, the way we work, how we work. We talk healthcare. The Cleveland Clinic Innovation Organization, they said, if you can keep people healthy on the space station for 6 months, a year, and you're doing it from Earth, that means we should be doing a lot more telemedicine, as an example. We don't need people to come in there for us to monitor how they're doing. And that's actually happening. And a lot of that's because people are learning how to do this in other areas. So I see a lot of things changing, and that's just from an aerospace perspective. I'm sure it's going to happen similar in other areas as well.
Lance, how different will finance be in 10 years?
I'll just add a couple more thoughts. So we're seeing a more diffuse workforce. So I mentioned the term earlier, people topology, this idea that, we're going to source talent where we can, and some of it's going to look non-traditional, and some of it's going to look more traditional, and, there's obviously been a move to Southeast Asia over time, but, we're seeing Eastern Europe, we're seeing South America, like there are other pools of talent that we want to tap, given this whole notion of a war on talent. I think that matters a lot. So the interaction models, like this whole soft skill conversation, starts to evolve us into like, what does telepresence look like? Like, how do we leverage video? How do we leverage social media kinds of paradigms? So like chat rooms across groups that are maybe working across 5 time zones, like that, those kinds of questions I think will evolve the workplace as well.
Time for maybe one more?
1 minute sign.
Oh, is it one? Oh. One more. We'll be quick. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, my name is Sarah Nunez, and I really work on project management offices where you have project managers working with teams to deliver solutions and accelerate business results. And I think my biggest concern, being in multiple global organizations, is really the level of complexity that every single individual face with culture, organizational cultures, and the changes that are happening so rapidly. There is a fear factor that really frees people, no matter how smart they can be. And my question to all of you, or maybe the advice that I like to hear, is what do you do about that? What do we do from the academia perspective, to prepare the workforce to come to organizations that have multiple cultures? There may be ones that is control and command. There may be others that are very free in spirit. But how do you balance that, and how do we prepare the workforce to really apply their knowledge and their skills in an environment that, in many cases, is maybe very challenging?
Amrit?
We see a highly global workforce. We see a workforce that is, working, often at very different time zones and so forth. And one thing I think we have to be very, very deliberate, very intentional about is making sure that there's a good degree of connectedness. So, for example, being thoughtful about putting in place mechanisms of communicating that are, simple, that are very practical, very modern in a way. Many of us will look at sort of email as our primary mode of communication, and what we're already seeing is that for the next generation, email is really old school. And so now, for example, we have instituted a set of, whether it is Teams or Yammer or a variety of different channels that actually allow these shorter, more visual, more video-oriented communications. And they allow, I think, some degree of communication in that workforce that shows, look, there's a human being at the end of this, and let me see a little bit of his or her personality so that I can understand. And I think that changes the culture to a more trusting one, which is important.
I think we're out of time, and with that, thank the panel and all of you for the great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.